Welcome to Born to be Barefoot. I'm your host, Stuart Gordon, with my co-host, Katie Suyuki. So here we go. Welcome to our latest episode of Born to be Barefoot podcast, sponsored by the lovely Barefoot Science Insole Company. And we've got a guest today who I'm absolutely thrilled to have on the podcast. He's a guy I've met very briefly once before. We shared a webinar. His name's Dave Lemke. He's from Texas, somewhere in Texas. We'll hear a bit more about that. Now, Dave is, how can I describe him? I'm going to use descriptions that other people have used for him. Wizard. The guy's a wizard. He's a body-working wizard. He's a technical wizard using a method of technology called SEMG, and we're going to hear a lot about that in a minute, and EEG and various other things. So, Dave, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Stuart. Thanks, Katie.
Katie, my co-host, I know knows you. She's going to be probing you with some interesting stories and getting you to spill the beans on a few things. But before we crack on with that, I know you're going to use terms like SEMG, as I just said a moment ago, and E. Can you just briefly, for our listeners, explain what they are so that we don't lose people and get overcomplicated?
Okay, yeah. Surface EMG, electromyography. Myo is muscle. So if you're going to have an electrocardiogram, it would be your heart that they're measuring. Electromyography means it's muscles that are monitored. And surface means we're monitoring from the surface, not putting needles in your body and altering your motion. So it's a listening device. We use wireless systems so you can move pretty much completely unimpaired and normally while we monitor electrical activity in muscles. That's what surface EMG. And we add in kinesiological surface EMG just because it's, in effect, it's a way of studying movement or using that technology to study what's happening in muscles during movement.
That's fantastic. That's really cleared that up for me and hopefully for everybody else out there listening. So without further ado, we're going to get cracking. We're going to get some questions firing at you and get some stories. So let's go.
Where are you? Are you in Texas? Are you still in Connecticut? You're in Texas. You are. Yeah. You're at Bioperformance.
Yes. Yeah. I'm between San Antonio and Austin. You know, that's where our places where my office is. So it's a good central for Texas. It's called Central Texas. So yeah.
So are you attached to a university, Dave, or
not attached? I do consulting work. Like my name will show up on some papers shortly with where we're doing a study. I'm helping Baylor University with a study for its autistic kids, quantifying what happens in autistic kids after they've ridden a horse. But it's a mechanical device they've created that simulates or models exactly what happens in a horse when a horse is walking. So it's basically it's an invention of this genius engineer who managed to, replicate the motions within a horse's body when walking. And so we're able to conduct a study because it can be done indoors. You can do repetitions. You can do, test different durations of exposure to the horse, all this kind of thing, which with a regular horse, you could never do. So it would be just too complicated. So yeah, that's the thing I'm doing right now. So it's kind of spins off of, work that I've done testing various exercises or devices over the years. It's a long story, but when I got working with them, they needed to quantify some things with EMG, and I was just in the right place at the right time. So I'm not. They pay me, but I'm not tied to them. So that's how.
But is that work or anything connected with a book called The Horse Boy?
I don't think so. No, and I might find out that it is, but I don't think so.
Right.
Not that
There was a fascinating book I read a number of years ago. The author is the father of a kid who was autistic, and they didn't realize he was autistic. His mother was a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and the father was a travel writer who spent a lot of time living with indigenous tribes and writing about their activities. But he also was a very experienced horseman, and they were living down in Texas. And what happened was the boy just would suddenly go, boom, he'd bolt. And on one occasion, he ran into a paddock where there was a little herd of horses with a mare that was sort of the lead mare who ruled it with an iron hoof. And this kid made a beeline straight at this horse. And the dad caught up and saw this happening, knew enough not to go running in after him. And he watched what was happening. You could see the mother didn't move. Her ear just twitched onto the little boy. She sort of was licking and chewing. She was still grazing. So he knew that she wasn't getting aroused and ready to bolt or do anything. And he literally threw himself underneath her belly, in between her legs, and started picking daisies and making daisy chains and swinging on. So the dad slowly walked in. And anyway, the long and short of that was that the owner of that ranch, when he heard about that, said, use the mare. So the dad was then taking the boy out, riding on the horse. Mm-hmm. And suddenly the kid started to say words, speak and make sentences. And he found at different gaits, at walk or at trot, it would be different. Right. So this is a bit of a long story, but then a second thing happened, which was they had to go to a UN conference on these indigenous tribes. And he was asked to go and help out, having from his work with things like the Kalahari Bushmen and such like. Anyway, the little boy had to go because nobody could look after him. And he again bolted in the middle of this conference and ended up sitting in amongst a bunch of shaman from various indigenous tribes and was completely calm amongst them. So the dad, slightly different thinking, put two and two together and said, right, what we need to do is find the most powerful shaman in the world and get to them on horseback. When the most powerful shaman turned out were in the Siberia, in Mongolia, which of course is the home of the horse. So he set about this project, got funding, got a TV crew to film it, and basically rode with this kid until they found what was reputedly the most powerful shaman. And somehow this kid's development massively improved over the space of 2 short meetings with this shaman of this tribe. And the guy then is Jacob Isaacson, I think his name is. And he came back and he set up a centre in Wales in the UK using horses to work with kids with autism, because he discovered how this walking gait or the trot or whatever generated some sort of rhythm within them that enabled them to speak. So anyway, there you go.
Yeah, it was a very...
it's a great book.
But like, Stuart, you work a lot with horses. Like, what do you think about the whole mechanical versus like spiritual animal with the soul type thing? Do you think that, like, what I mean?
That'll be an interesting thing. It's a really good question, because obviously with the mechanical horse, you're not going to get that connection.
That energy coming off of them,
It purely becomes a mechanical thing. So it'd be really interesting to see whether that does create the same effects as if you were actually on a horse picking up on its energy, its thought processes. Yeah. Because I know,
and creating that trust, like if you're on mechanical, something mechanical, you kind of trust that it's going to perform correctly. Whereas when you're on an animal, there's always that element of like, are they going to dart on me?
Right. The element of surprise.
I think with this thing, it's there's always the element of surprise with horses, of course, but there's also this connection. And we're going off on a different tangent here, but we work with horses in a particular way where the aim is that you're riding a horse and you think, and it does. So you don't have to be working on the reins. You don't have to be particularly moving your body, your seat. You're just thinking, at the next fence post, we're going to go left. And the horse will go left.
Is this the ninja stuff you do with horses, Stuart?
Say again?
This sounds pretty ninja to me.
It's I suppose you could ninja's one way, but it's based on the vaqueros, the Spanish, and came over obviously into places like California, Texas, and California, and they worked their horses with this connection and the most minimal amount of physical intervention, but make that connection. And we've worked with the guys who've come over and worked with clinics, but you can do it, and if you just use your breath, and that. Obviously, you can't get with a mechanical horse. You can get the same movement. So if it's a rhythmic thing that changes something in the autistic child's brain cycle.
When I first met with the Baylor team and they introduced me to the mechanical horse, it was a presentation they did. I was in attendance and I sat on it for 5 minutes. And then I walked around the room and thought, nothing of it. It didn't affect me in any way until I sat on the chair. And I immediately felt like my hips had been closed into a vice, just stopped from moving organically, naturally. And so I approached them afterwards and I said, I was invited up to the lab and I met with them, and I didn't think they would have me back after I told them this, but I said, I don't think that what we're doing with this horse is we're having some kind of treatment that's aiding in autism. I think what we're doing is exposing the harm we're doing to children by sitting them in chairs and asking them to do difficult things. They need to move. There's this whole cerebrospinal fluid pump, this lumbopelvic dynamic that's being arrested with furniture and with lack of play. And surprisingly, they had me back afterwards because they were truly looking for what was happening here. They weren't looking, and what we found now that we're 2 years into the study and 580 recordings into the study is that you can't categorize an autistic child, period. You can't put them in a hopper and have them all come out at one particular point on a spectrum. The spectrum is like a globe. It's this, there are multiple facets of development and dimensions of development that are different in every child. And A, they're easily distracted, most of them. B, they won't reproduce emotion to save your life. So all these challenges that we face, but when we do get the data that's a repeatable test that's reliable enough that we can analyze the data, we're seeing that there is a dramatic reconstitution of normal human motion pattern following an exposure of 30 minutes on this mechanical horse. So the goal of it is to quantify, what part of that motion is pure motion and can be, packaged up for some sort of delivery to help a child in need and to help a whole range of children. In fact, they even had some results with elderly people with Alzheimer's and stuff, stroke victims that had gotten. It's like they're modeling this organic motion that humans are habitually restricting with their furniture and with their behaviors and lack of normal motion. So I was thinking about your son and how, who knows, he gets on a horse and maybe he doesn't speak for a while. Instead of talking too much, he's suddenly it's more of a normalization of that. It's not so much it's always going to make kids talk more if they get on a horse. They speak less, or that they just think more clearly because they're engaged in this motion that is just it. What the motion is, it actually, the horse, the gait motion in the back of a horse actually models normal human lumbopelvic motion, but it does it asymmetrically. The curious thing I've always brought to it is that it does it in exactly the opposite asymmetry that humans naturally gravitate toward in their self-defensive protective reflex patterns. So the horse and the human are like this symbiotic, this synergistic element. And I believe that it's just as good for the horse as it is for the human for that reason.
Yeah, I saw a brilliant presentation years ago by an equine chiropractor. And he made exactly that point, Dave, that, the horse's pelvis, if you look at it from behind, it moves the same figure of eight. It's got those three planes of movement. So you've got, frontal plane, sagittal plane, and rotational plane, backwards and forwards, up and down, side to side, rotation. And he said, here in traditional riding, he said, you're taught to push your pelvis into a sort of a posterior, anterior, only in that sagittal plane. And he said, he gave this, I don't know whether you're able to see this where I'm standing, but so he sort of said, have you ever seen anybody walking along like, like that?
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, Stuart, I have. But it's very distracting when you see that. I've been in a lot
absolutely, of it. Yeah. But and he said, so what with the horse, move in the same way. And it was fascinating because most of the people, there's about 40 people, and my wife actually set this seminar up, and it was a lot of traditional English style riders, and they were horrified because, well, that's how we're taught to ride. So push the horse on with your pelvis, push it on, and but this is why you end up being thrown off.
Right. Yes. I grew up riding bareback. I never knew a saddle until I was 16 years of age, and I fell off a lot of horses because my legs were a little too short to get a good grip on these ponies that my brothers and I were conscripted to muck out stalls while my mom went off riding on our horse. So she traded our legs for boarding of the horse. But the things I learned about, I don't think that you'd be able to think a horse into motion and correct motion if you put a saddle on. It's kind of like anywhere that you put a shoe on your foot and feel the ground. It's there's this interaction and engagement that I think is, and like you said, Katie, you can't quantify that connection between the animal and the person, that trust and that bond. And that is not what we're trying to.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do actually is there's some agencies here in the US that they still consider any kind of equine therapy or intervention, they consider it experimental or investigational. And so they don't want to fund it. And it can be, warriors returning from the Middle East and they're going into these equine programs, being partnered up with horses, having these remarkable results and improvements, but they can't get it paid for because it's experimental. It's ludicrous. So we're trying to bring some quantification to that model so that it can get off the ground and just be free to help. I guess that's.
You mentioned the cerebrospinal fluid and the pumping action. Mm-hmm. Is that being measured in some way with pressure or as well as obviously you're doing the neural stimulus and the neuromuscular stimulus, but is that fluid pressure being measured?
they have a 19-channel wireless EEG headset that they use also. So and I don't even know how they make sense of that data because it's incredibly sensitive. My instruments are sensitive, but when I look at the EEG, I just think I would not even know where to start making sense of that. But because of the way the brain has been mapped and the way that movement and cognition and all these different things are very well mapped and ordered, you can see qualitative changes in brain function in relation to that motion being applied to the body. But that's not my area at all. I wouldn't know how to recognize improvement or anything. The reason we're doing it the way we're doing it, though, we have motion capture, we have it's 3D motion capture, we have EMG, and we have EEG, but we also have the gold standard cognitive and perceptual testing that's being done concurrent with all of these technologies, so that we can take what we know is an improvement and we can correlate it with what we don't know is an improvement, for example, in the brain. So if we see EMG shows improvement, motion shows improvement, cognition shows improvement, then whatever's happening in the brain must now be associated with improvement. Does that make sense? So we're trying to really bring the technologies into sync with each other in a way that's never been done, I don't think, in any labs before. And I think it just hasn't been done because it's the things that brought us all together are so unlikely to have ever happened anywhere else. It's just, it's a perfect storm of bringing together people obsessed with their particular fields and willing, and then, and having somebody be able to write a grant for that after we'd all been doing a lot of volunteer-based work, and get it off the ground. We're learning in this first 2 years is how to do it better next time, even because there's so many variables that we're learning how to bring, rein in a little bit. So anyway, that's one project.
Yeah.
The feet hitting the ground and like the human lumbopelvic system engaging with a live, organic motion generator versus being on a piece of, inanimate furniture. Like if you're walking on a flat, like my feet get sore when I walk on a sidewalk. My knees bother me, my hips, whatever, but I can hike in the woods for hours and hours. I can run on rocky terrain and all these different things. And I never get that because there's I'm a very strong, I'd say, proponent of what I call infinite variability of motion. I think infinite variability of motion is is necessary for ultimate human performance. Yeah. And so anytime you don't have that, or that you subtract some element of organic from the motion, you will pay a price. And you actually, Stuart, you said something when we were on the event back in the fall, the LER event, that really stuck with me. I probably share this with people nearly every day, and clinically, I talk about this, the thing you said. Imagine you get up in the morning and your feet hit the floor, and your bare feet hit the rug, and then the cold hardwood, and then on into the stone tiles of the kitchen, and out onto the warm wood surface of the front porch, and you pick up your newspaper, and then you go all the way back and you get in your bed. Now imagine doing that all with your slippers on, and how much less information, or how much information have you deprived your brain of to deal with your environment. And however you said it, I mean, I'm paraphrasing obviously, but you said effectively that. And it's really stuck with me, because people don't understand that your feet are the way you're engaging with the world. And for a runner, oh my goodness, it doesn't matter if you're a sprinter, jogger, hiker, walker, whatever you are, that relationship is key. And I see it all the time when I do my own testing. And it's one of the things, one of the reasons I love testing exercise devices or various appliances or interventions, is I get to see which things really create the patterns that I see as associated with ideal ultimate human performance. Because I do have some ultimate human performance people in my system, like Katie is, I had Katie, in volunteering in a class, and she went through, let's see how many motions it was. It was something like 17 different activities we had to do. And some were
one's like, you need to do this exercise until you fail. Like, you need to continue this going until you, and not just give up, like, till you fail.
Yes, so there she was, going past the record of the person that had previously, well, there was a record that I had previously, and she said, well, what's the record? And I said, it was like 120 seconds or something. And so it's past 120 seconds, and everyone in the class is getting nervous. And I said, well, Katie, you're done. I mean, what are you doing? She said, well, I'm setting a new record. And that record stands at 154 seconds. So good luck, anyone.
What were you doing? What was the exercise?
Just a prone hip extension. She's lying on face down on the surface of the back half of a therapy table, with someone sitting on the other half for stability. And then she extends her whole, feet and legs up. So glutes are here, hamstrings, feet are here, extends up and maintains that diving board position for as long as she possibly can before she finally goes.
Okay. I'm on it tomorrow.
You better film that.
You better, you got to record it.
So were you holding on to with your arms to the front end, to the table?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just hold on to the table and.
Oh, this is my kind of competition, right?
It was really interesting.
Not dangerous at all. Like when she did there was a bridge exercise that she did, and we do one bridge where she's squeezing her knees together, and it demonstrates that when you add the adductor contraction, that the adductor contraction couples with the flexion chain and inhibits the glutes. So she pushes up into a bridge with the adductors contracted. Glutes are very inactive. But when you resist abduction, you massively contract the glutes. Well, we had a volunteer come up and grab and hold around Katie's knees so that she could pull the knees apart and go up. And the first time she did it, she threw this woman across the room with the power of her legs. So, and then we controlled her a little bit. We told her, control yourself a little, and we'll get the recording. So that's very, anyway, I have all that on
video. Oh, that's brilliant. So, how do you want to be described, Dave?
How do I want to be described? When people ask me for a business card, I just say it's a long story. And then whenever I describe what I do, they always ask, oh, I need to come see you. And so I'm always very careful about how I describe it. I was trained as a body worker in Canada back in the 80s, but I was trained by a gentleman who started the first massage therapy programs in the 1960s in Ontario. And he believed that those programs had developed into such systematic methodology that they really effectively trained the intuition out of anyone. And so he came to Alberta, where I lived in Calgary at the time, and he started a program that was dedicated to teaching massage as a communication skill, an exploration skill. So you learn all the anatomy, the physiology, the pathology, all that necessary science, but I was trained as an explorer, and I ended up being I was mentored by him for 4 years. I ended up taking over that program. I just naturally fit into it. I was practicing Tai Chi at the time, and was newly out of history in the music business before that. And I'd been in lifeguarding before that, but I was seriously injured. So my background was being trained as a Canadian body worker. And then 10 years later, being asked, right as I was being hired as a trigger point specialist in a physical therapy clinic, I was asked to learn how to use this technology they had. And they had Surface EMG, kinesiological EMG, and no one in their office knew how to use it. They bought it, but they didn't know how to use it. And so I already had been digging into that data, into EMG data, to help my motor point sequence treatment to become more effective. And so when they asked me to train, I knew, wow, you could have knocked me over with a feather. It was just, of course I'll train. I've only heard about this technology. I've only read studies. And so suddenly I was doing my own recordings. And another 10 years later, I was sent off to the Olympic Training Center to train in dartfish video for video analysis. And so coupling the hands-on exploration with Surface EMG recording, with video analysis of motion, and all the while having all these interesting cases come along that needed to be looked into further. I always got everybody's, discards, the people couldn't help. And it's because I had these tools or instruments or a different way of looking at things. A, because I was an explorer. B, because I had a compass. And C, I had a way to map it all out. And so over time, I just morphed into this odd kind of highly non-technophobic body worker, or highly intuitive body worker. So I use the best of technology and the best of intuition, I guess, together to do the things that I do. And I end up getting called in to help with projects. And I've done a lot of teaching over the years because of that. So I've become a teacher of teachers sometimes, or I help people develop educational programs and materials and approaches, because that's another form of exploration and analysis and everything. Even just the art of conveying an idea, can be enhanced with you need data and information to explore and present ideas. And so I've been equipped with that. So I get to tell, I'm a storyteller. I'm an explorer and a storyteller, and I'm a non-technophobic body worker. And I've got a lot of experience. I've been 38 years at this now. So I've got an example or a story or a joke for everything you could possibly imagine. And I'm a dad. I've raised 4 sons, and they all do very interesting different things. And we got to know our kids to see who they were. We didn't approach parenting like this one's going to be the doctor, and this one's going to be the lawyer, and this one's going to be the whatever. And so we end up with a very interesting family, and so it's a constant learning. I love to learn, and I love to teach, and I love everything to do with human performance and infinite variability of motion. I'm terrible. I mean, you could edit out 95% of that.
That's all going to stay. And I have to confess, I'm going to steal all of that as well, because it's quite. I think we may have been twins separated at birth, because we've followed fairly similar pathways in that pattern you've just described. So I found that fascinating listening to that, because people ask me, what do you do, or what do you describe? Yeah, and I said, well, I don't know. I just work on people and decide which path to follow and which treatment tool to use, and whether we need to use, in my case, Optigate technology or something now, and whatever it might be. And and the intuitive thing is key. And my two of my closest friends are both vets. One's an equine vet, and one's a orthopedic and neurological specialist with cats and dogs, probably one of the best in the world. And you said something in your description there, which they both separately have used with when we've been chatting, which was they want to combine the best of modern technology with, in their time, they would describe as old school veterinary practice, intuitive practice. And, they're both Irish guys, and they've both grown up on farms in Ireland, and they've got that, again, born genetically. It's in there, yeah. And they've got it. So, there they are with CT scanners and MRI scanners and all the rest of it. But they want to get hold of that cat or that dog or that horse, watch it move, handle it, see what the tissue form is like, et cetera, before engaging with the technology.
Absolutely. I always say, I need to see, I just had a call with a gal on Friday on my way home, and she was explaining her situation, whether she would be able to come in and see me. And I said, to be honest, when a little boy says, hey, let me see that, what they mean is give me that so I can feel it and mess with it and play with it. And I said, so, I can only say so much. I need to see you. I can't tell you if I can help you if I can't see you, and I see with my hands, really. So, instruments help objectify and measure. I would have to add too that they keep us honest, because our intuition we can go a little awry. We can get, I do have some of the blood in me. I am a bit Irish, and I do have a tendency to get philosophical and a little misty-eyed and a little wide-eyed and wild-eyed crazy. And so I need that anchoring of the technology to put some, what do they call them in bowling, those bumpers they put up. I need to have some kind of bumpers like that so that my brain doesn't go
on track a bit, yeah.
Some completely irrational place. So I need a track to run on. And so that was a great thing about having EMG fairly early in my career, only 10 years into my career, was when it pointed and showed that there was something with the serratus anterior in a shoulder issue. I'd never even thought of the role of serratus anterior. And yet that's the first motor point in getting a really major lasting effective release in a locked up shoulder. If you don't treat serratus anterior, everybody else is just going to be laughing at you. So, but it was the EMG that pointed to that. And so I knew there had to be more. And so I've been searching, using that instrument ever since. And it's incredible how predictable, reliable, and understandable human protective, defensive reflex patterns are. And when you treat the pattern versus the pathology, how profound those benefits and outcomes can be. So that's what I do 3 days a week when I'm in the office treating people, is I'm just talking their system in off the ledge, talking them down from this imbalanced motor pattern that they've gotten themselves into, and which is, of course, and then that led to I had to invent some things, because, and I'm sure you've invented some things yourself, because there are things that needed to exist, or discovered some things that needed to exist to help this person that really were just not out there in the mainstream. That just there's something that's needed here that they're not getting, in order to supplement and cross-train out of their most habitual and self-defensive and dysfunctional patterns. So you end up finding out, yes, that's true for the person who has the pathology, but it's also true for the person who wants ultimate human performance. That elite athlete who wants to reduce the time it takes to transition from flexion chain to extension chain in gait, for example. What if you're at 0.5 seconds delay for the glute to react, and you need to be at 0.05 seconds? How do you get from there to there? You have to have a way to measure that and know whether you're nailing it or not. It can't just be, I think I feel better. And I know people notoriously, their feelings get in the way of actual facts. They feel the thing they can feel, but they so often don't have any awareness of the cause, or the actual disability or dysfunction they might be adapting to.
Yeah, I mean, David, you talk about a bunch about things that you've invented, and I've been fortunate enough to sit in on your the invention that I'm talking about is your functional chain trainer.
Correct. Yeah.
The FCT and Stuart, are you familiar with the functional chain trainer?
Yep.
Yeah. So, Dave, why don't you tell us a little bit about it so that our audience can?
Well, I can first. I'll tell you about how it came to exist, because you know how. And I wanted to ask you guys. I mean, I'll get you guys talking a lot if I do this, but there's always those things that happen in your career where nothing's going to be the same after that. Just the text you get from somebody who wants to work with you, or that somebody's going to come and be a volunteer in your class in upstate New York, and it's Katie Tsuyuka, the world champion snowboarder. So like these moments in your career when nothing's going to be the same. And one of those for me was sitting at a desk in a physio clinic in Idaho, and the guy next to me says, "So look at this grip-free cuff that's used for these guys have invented out in Montana. This guy owns the world record in bench press because he's figured out a way to eliminate grip from all of these resistance exercises. So they use this grip-free cuff so that they can, because think of how many times you do reps with your hands when you're at the gym. Every exercise is a hand grip rep, right? So they took that away, and this guy was able to. He's a small guy, and yet he holds the world record for bench press. But his core and his trunk are so powerful from not being constrained by that limited thing. So anyway, so this natural pro bodybuilder physio who's sitting next to me says, "Hey, we should call these guys. We've been looking for this kind of a thing. It's a really cool invention. We should call them and see if maybe they want data to support, maybe we can get them to hire us to study this thing so that they can get some data to support their thing. And we can have some fun studying this because we've got the instruments." And so we started studying that grip-free cuff, and off the charts, just incredible improvement when you don't have to grip. So that was a huge thing. And so we did studies for them and helped them get data, and that's helped them market some of their products. So some years after that, maybe not quite 10 years after that, I was kicking around this idea that all I'm ever treating in humans is a flexion overuse pattern. That there's too much sitting and driving. And then we go to the gym and we crunch and we squat and we push and we lunge and we curl and we press. And we're so dominant in this flexion chain that I'm reading all the time with EMG. I'll use the term delayed for want to be politically correct. People don't like the term retarded, but it really is a mechanistically, intrinsically, electronically delayed signal into extension chain muscles because of an excessive dominance of flexion chain. So I had this idea suddenly about a treadmill, and I thought, wait a minute, what if we could rig something up in a treadmill that would create resistance in the extension part of gait instead of only letting the body move freely in gait? And so I ordered up all this. It's the FlexLate people in Montana that did the grip-free cuffs. They sent me a whole pile of stuff, resistance bands and cuffs and all this kind of stuff. But I didn't have a treadmill at the time. I had ordered it and it didn't show up. So I just hooked these things onto this makeshift door mount thing. And I started into what would be kind of like a cross-country ski motion. And I opened the palms up and turned the palms back. And I was trying to feel for the most pure extension chain activation. Well, I did it for maybe a minute. And I did it maybe a minute twice a day for 2 days. And I felt like I got kicked in the butt by a horse. I mean, I was in pain in my extension chain. I thought, I'm a healthy, fit person. Why is and then within 2 weeks of doing that, two things happened. One, I felt like a superhero, like I could do anything. I felt invincible. This weird kind. I was 50 years old at the time. And I felt like I could just do anything. I'm demonstrating Warrior 3 pose to people and showing how I can do all these cool things. And I don't even do yoga, right? So it's just ridiculous, the things And then the other thing that happened was my stomach started to flatten out. And I thought, well, I wasn't doing any abdominal work. I wasn't doing crunches or core stuff. And I thought, well, wait a minute. Transversus abdominis is a key connector muscle to the whole extension chain. It's on the extension circuit. And it must be getting overflow voltage from activation of the extension chain, doing this cross-country ski-like exercise. So I ended up getting a Nordic track just for fun. The old wood cross-country ski machine things that Nordic track came out with. one of the best-selling exercise devices of all time, believe it or not. And I started doing EMG work. I filmed this triathlete lady getting on and off and trying to do Nordic track, and she almost fell a couple times. It was quite humorous. And then I filmed her using my contraption, and she immediately got these wonderful tracings in her extension chain that were almost impossible to achieve because of the complication of the Nordic track. And I thought, wow, this is like an improvement on the cross-country ski machine, and cross-country skiing is a wonderful exercise. So it started, the Canadian people were calling it Ski X at the time. They still do. And, but I just called it, I called it the FCT, Functional Chain Trainer. They're calling it the Extension Chain Trainer. I actually took that device now to Baylor University, to their motion lab. They gave me an engineering class. So I was a different kind of professor, they called me. And so they gave me this team, and they did all the EMG work and everything to fine tune and improve that kit. So, because I sent you the new one, right? I sent you the one with the proper cross.
Yeah, it's on the back of my door, and like I just leave it up because it's okay. Yeah, I just leave it up. But
for visual, you don't have the room,
just so that people can come and ask me, like, Katie, what kind of S&M thing are you into, and why is it in your kitchen?
Yeah. Yes,
because it's the only, like, it has to go on a door that kind of locks in the frame, it can't go on the side of the door that the door opens, right? So I have it and that's the only door that I have with enough room to actually get away from it to do the exercise.
But at least that's super, super good that you can. So that version was arrived at that we needed to separate the shoulder anchor points so that you could get a more direct activation of medial triceps, which is one of the absolute first muscles to go on anybody as they age. The rest of the triceps, not so bad, but the medial triceps, it just dies. And you see people all the time. I mean,
wow.
The bat wings as they get going.
Exactly. So
yeah.
So separating that was really important. And then having the ability to adjust the height of the lower limb, because people are not all the same height. So you needed height adjustability, you needed width adjustability, so you could perfect and really, so that you could more precisely activate the target muscles. You could fine tune that. And that's what I called it, the FCT. What did I call it? I don't know. So high performance, new updated, new whatever it is. So that's
2.0.
What was it called?
2.0. FCT 2.0.
So that extension chain trainer is what I call it, an extension chain trainer, and I call it extension chain training. The concept is just that you need to be able to reduce that time of that delayed signal. You need to normalize your muscle inventory availability from your central processor by training your extension chain, because your body will only do, when the going gets tough, your body's going to do what you've trained to do, right? Not what you wish you would do or what you would hope to do. It's going to do what you've trained to do. So if you train your extension chain and you connect all those links up and you make sure that there are no weak links in that chain, the ability for your body to instantaneously utilize those muscles along with all your flexion chain muscles goes way up. And so I've had elite athletes use it. I've had people that couldn't balance who are in their 70s and 80s use it and improve their single limb balance. And everybody in between. So one of the curious things too is like middle-aged women and incontinence was a hilarious kind of a thing that came up. People reporting to me changes like that, not just, drop in anxiety medications, like so many different things. This one guy who said he was involved in a big court case and so much drama and so much stress. And he said that within 10 minutes of doing 2 minutes of this cross extension, I just call it cross extension now, it's he could think more clearly and he was more calm and could make decisions about this thing. And so the applications are really not limited by any.
Well, you're talking about the cognitive aspect, and it's not just there's cognitive aspects to every single exercise you do. But this one, it's like, it's quite intense because you have this backward motion that you're not used to doing. Right. And then, your opposite, right hand is working with your left foot. So opposites and backwards moving. So it's, I'll go and do it. I've had it where I'm like, I'm finishing out my workout, so I'll do this. And someone over in my living room, because I'm working out in my kitchen living room area, and they're like, oh, that looks like really cool. Like, I want to try it. And I just forget, and I'll like put the time, and I'll put them in the cuffs and everything and switch out the bands. And And then I'm like, and this is what we're doing. And they just like, they can't do that motion. And I forget that I'm like, oh, I got to do, dry work with them before I put them in this contraption. Right.
Yes. It is not an easy thing to learn because it is counterintuitive. We don't have a built-in reflex in our brain that says we should be able to instantly go backwards in the exact opposite motion to what we're habituated into forwards. In fact, the mistakes people make when they're learning it are so predictable because they will always substitute a flexion chain muscle for an extension chain muscle. They'll internally rotate their hand to go back. They'll turn their foot out to engage piriformis and TFL. Like they'll go parallel. They'll always do those things, and then they'll go into flexion. Like they won't breathe. They'll forget to exhale as they're extending their lower limb. Like it's so predictable, and that it's humorous. Well, somewhat humorous, but we.
You make it humorous.
I keep looking at this, David. The fascinating thing for me, when I saw this product, and I got sent one from our sponsor of this podcast, from Lance Todd. And one of the things I've been doing, or trying to get people to do for years, is walk or run backwards.
Right.
As part of if they go out for a run, I think one of the other things I mentioned in that conference that we were involved previously was that one of the things I like to get people to do when they're running is change direction, go sideways, go hop, go skip, run up a bank. If there's a bank alongside, run up the bank and come back down it again. If there's a curb there, do some sort of singing in the rain dance routine, but run backwards, walk backwards. And I also get people when they're face down on my treatment table to do the backward walking movement, arm and leg. And I was doing it, fun enough, with a lady today who's got some serious balance problems, so she's permanently in flexion. And oh my goodness, the difficulty we had in getting her to raise her right leg back and her left arm back at the same time.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Oh my goodness me. And so it was a really fascinating thing. And I mentioned one of those vets earlier. Now he's a guy, he's an orthopedic surgeon. He spends hours and hours and hours bent over a treatment, theatre operating table. Then he goes into his office and he's bent at his computer writing up.
Doing paperwork.
Yeah.
Admin,
And the funny thing was, years and years ago, I've been treating him on and off now for 29, 30 years and trying to just keep him going. And we'd always made the assumption that it was the bent over the operating table thing. But anyway, I got there one day and he was sat at his desk and he looked like Gollum. He was bent and twisted. And I went, oh my God, don't move. And I took a photograph and he said, I'm not using that. And I said, is that how you sit? But the reality was, everybody is sitting for far too long, as you were mentioning earlier. Then in his case, he's then bent over a treatment table, or then you get in your car and you drive home from your desk and so on. And then when they go for a run, they stay in that slightly flexed position.
Well, they're starting in it. That's my concern is always that they're taking an unbalanced motor system out for a run. If it was your car, you'd never take it to the racetrack before you align the wheels and made sure all the cylinders were firing. All that. You would never race anything, never stress a vehicle. But we do it with our bodies. We train into this imbalance, and then we go and we load the system. And that is what I've seen over and over on EMG. I'm always looking for what is a sustainable pattern. And because if we load this pattern, will the system break down? And what I'm seeing is you need full muscle inventory. You have 640 muscles in your body. If they're all working well, it's like an orchestra playing beautiful music from the same score. If you don't train everybody to work together, you will be sentenced to half of that group being more toward the sidelines and trying to play with half the team. And you're never going to play with half the orchestra or the band. And it's always going to be a disaster if you hit a stressful point. You can't fall or land or jump and catch and land on one foot or all those different things in a system that's lacking full muscle inventory. My first thought with correcting this problem was like you, Stuart, to walk backwards. How can we get people walking backwards? And I found, first of all, out on the street, it's just dangerous and it's unsafe and it's well, that's just it. It's just not safe, and people aren't going to be very good at it. it's really hard to do it with confidence and with relaxation in your core. You're going to do it defensively, which is the very sympathetic side of the autonomic nervous system we're trying to relieve of this dominance pattern. So I thought about, okay, can they walk backwards on a treadmill? Well, they can't walk backwards on a treadmill because they will get hurt. It's dangerous. And so I started doing this thing where I would walk backwards in a swimming pool and try to exaggerate the motions. And so I traveled a lot at the time, that was where I would go, I was in the hotel pools and stuff. I just called it the backwards butt walk in a swimming pool. But it's really hard to get lower limb resistance that's adequate to really stimulate those muscles. So that's when I thought, wait, we could do it with resistance bands. And then with the treadmill, that was still my thinking, was let's use a treadmill. But when I didn't have one and I hooked it onto a door, I realized, wait, this is safer than anything. This is the safest thing you could ever do. You can't hurt yourself with this. And yet you're concentrating the effect of walking backwards, and you're magnifying or you're amplifying the effect that you would get going backwards in water, because you're able to choose and stack resistance bands or whatever you do. So it becomes this stackable, adjustable, ideal way of getting your whole motor system to work together, your whole muscle inventory to work together. So that's process of elimination, I guess. Because there's always, remember that crazy. I do like to bump up against the bumpers and try crazy things, but running backwards, I had a knee injury, and I found that going backwards down hills was actually pain-free. Whereas forward up hills was pain-free, but if I went forward down a hill, it would be a lot of pain. I had an anterior meniscus tear. And so I had to train to recover from that injury by going backwards down the hills. So that was kind of at the same time that I was working this whole thing out. Yeah,
that's something I've had people doing that, because I saw a lot of people go off on a walking holiday in the Alps or somewhere in Europe, or just on a long trail over it. They'd always come back with a knee injury that was worse walking downhill.
Down, yes.
And I would always say to them, well, turn down and walk down the hill backwards. When you get home, practice walking down the stairs backwards. Because they said, going upstairs doesn't hurt, but coming downstairs, I said, okay, well, come downstairs back. Exactly the same thing. And it's, without getting too technical, it's the eccentric function.
Yes, engaging the extension chain. Yeah. That's what's easing you down the hill instead of the flexion chain. Flexion chain using eccentrics in these deceleration, man, that is some of the hardest stuff on the human body. But, if we train to go the other way, it's better.
Well, have you worked with any runners or anything that you've seen them improve their times or whatever after they've started
absolutely
using
a lot. One gal, an ultra marathoner, she just lit up like it was Christmas when she got training with this thing. She's actually, I'm not sure if I sent you that video, a copy of that video, but she's an ultra marathoner, and she is just, as soon as she took to that exercise like a fish to water, and immediately had improved times, improved endurance, even her nutrition program. She began to be able to adjust some things. She was just a more highly efficient athlete. And this is, who runs these, ultra marathons. I don't even know how far they go, and they go to the craziest places.
We've talked to these people. It's crazy.
So these athletes, they're nuts. So that's definitely a thing. And runners,
nice nuts. Well, but nuts. we had 240 miler.
Yeah.
Yeah. 240 miles. And Stuart and I, we always ask these athletes and everything, how do you carry on forever? How do you extend that longevity of it? And would you think that the FCT falls into the realm of injury prevention to be able to?
If you have, let's take the knee, for example. The knee is a weight-bearing alignment structure, right? If you have appropriate and correct contribution from all of the muscles that control patellar tracking and how the femur lands in on the fib complex and how all of that is working. If that is working by the book and everything is great, then motion generates the metabolism of synovial fluids and all these other kinds of things. Movement is life to that mechanism and that structure. And it drives me crazy when people say, oh, all that pounding. pounding happens when this thing is working a little bit out of balance. The second that this thing is out of balance, or the second that the foot is not moving, like I always explain, a foot has as many muscles and bones as your hand does. It's just that we act like it's this sort of stump on the end of our legs, but it's this highly sensitive mechanism for engaging in this incredibly sophisticated motion pattern, which if it doesn't in any place in there, that motion is going to be demanded in your hip or in your knee. And so we want, if everybody's working together, there's that old saying, many hands make light work. And I always say, many muscles make effortless movement. That's the thing that this ultramarathoner said, is it just feels so much easier to do. Like I feel like I can increase my speed and my endurance is better. It just seems like a more efficient system. And I think, well, yeah, it's supposed to be an efficient system. You have 640 muscles in this system. If they're all working together in their proper proportions and ratios, then each of them is designed to do slightly more than its share. They become generators of energy. They're not just motors that break down and run out of fuel and then you're pounding on your joints. I get tired of hearing that. And I always hear it from people whose systems are out of phase. And whenever I hear that from a runner, I say, I need to look at your running. And the second I look at their running, I'm seeing the same patterns over and over again. There is not this light on their feet. I have a film of a Kenyan runner that I got many years ago when I was doing video analysis for a group up in Spokane, a sports medicine group. And he made this comment about, oh, he had this little pinch in his shoulder. Everyone's like, oh, this guy looks like he's off the street or something. And I thought, well, no, but people are asking for his autograph. I don't know who this guy is, but I think he's somebody. We should test him. And so we got this guy on film. And then he went and won the Bloomsday Road Race in Spokane the next day. The kinesiologist who said we shouldn't test him, he wrote me a note apologizing. I was sorry about that. Didn't realize that this guy, Gideon, he actually won the thing. And that guy could run 5 minute miles, 5 minute 10-second miles, as many as you want, whatever it takes. That was his pace. He could run that forever. And when I watched him, there was this lightness. It was all about lightness. And when you watch Kenyan runners, it's the lightness on their feet that really stands out. It's the lack of effort. And effort comes when inventory is lost. Effortless running is from full muscle inventory availability. That I'll stand on that till the day I die, because I experience it when I run myself. Proper form and everybody being turned on and doing what they're supposed to do, which means proper training, cross training out of your favorite patterns. If you make sure all your muscles are working, you're going to have that effortless motion. So it doesn't matter whether you're a weekend runner that does a few miles or whether you're all the way into the ultra marathons. You have to run light, and light running is going to be because many muscles are doing the job.
I like that.
Yeah,
makes sense for sure.
Yeah, one of the things
I don't tend to think of it as prevention. Like too many people think, "Oh, I'm trying to prevent injuries." I met Lance, Barefoot Science Lance, at a running conference in LA in 2012. I had knee pain. I was actually at that time experiencing knee pain, and I had never seen Barefoot Science before, didn't know what it was. I was there presenting on, actually, I was asked to present on problem data in EMG. That was my talk. And I remember thinking how hilarious this is, because the data is not the problem. The problem is people don't know how to look at the human body. They don't know how to make sense of the data, because the data doesn't make sense to a purely mechanical operator, because it's not purely mechanical. It's psychoneuroemotional, behavioral. It's a complex system that has motivations and compensations and pains and phobias and pain avoidance strategies, all the things that we're doing with every step we take. So I knew that about myself. I knew I wasn't doing too well with my knee. But put the Barefoot Science insoles in, and I could walk back and forth from the conference center to my hotel. No pain, walking on sidewalks. And Lance, he did this thing where he let everybody try the insoles, and then he asked for them back. And I said, forget it. I'll just write a check. And he just laughed at me. And that's what everybody said, though. Everybody in that conference just was blown away by this. And my treatment that I did on this gentleman to prove my point of the data not being the problem is he had a rotator cuff instability on the left side. And their whole thing was if the probability or the prominence of injury, I'm trying to think of how the proper term for it. Anyway, the likelihood of injury increases directly in relation to how long the foot stays in contact with the ground. And I remember sitting in the back, I almost burst out laughing because I thought, is this a joke? Are they trying to say that more injuries happen because the foot's on the ground longer, and that the solution is to not have the foot on the ground as long? And I'm picturing like helium balloons above you, and if you could just run in a swimming pool where you didn't touch the ground as much, well, sure, that'd be great. But how do you get that? So, but what I found out when I rebooted this guy's rotator cuff, they took him back in the lab and they were running him on a treadmill that had surface sensors built into it. And they said his gait is fixed. He's not spending as much time with his right foot in contact with the surface. And so I remember thinking, well, of course he's not, because his foot had to stay in contact with the ground long enough to correct the trajectory that was being thrown off by the lack of proper arm swing on the opposite side. So when we restored the arm swing on the opposite side, he only had to touch down and pick up, touch down and pick up. His running, he was a runner who knew how to run, and now he could run. But his glitch in his system was a weak rotator cuff on the left side. So as soon as it was turned back on, and that's why of course, I jokingly say, so how many times do you think they've had me back at that conference since 2000? Never. There was a podiatrist got up and threw his arms up and left when I started giving my presentation because he thought it was nonsense. This whole idea that I was sharing about, the whole body, the whole system working together and the need for full muscle inventory. It was nuts. So I was crazy to him. So, but then there was Lance, who tossed a Barefoot Science insole down on the table in front of him and said, "What do you think of this?" And I think that might have been what started him planning to leave, but I just put icing on the cake. Wow. But so he was looking at it purely from a mechanical point of view. He was trying to design, that podiatrist was trying to design an adjustable orthotic. And Lance comes forward with this thing that stimulates the proprioception in the apex of the arch of the foot and triggers actual strengthening of muscles in the foot, which, what a concept, so just completely different, opposite to anything I had ever seen. And at that time, I'll say one more thing about Barefoot Science. At that time, I absolutely would have objected to barefoot running on all kinds of sound biomechanical grounds and what I had seen with EMG, with people running barefoot and walking barefoot. And until I used those insoles for about 6 weeks, at about 6 weeks into it, I remember thinking, man, I can get up on my toes and reach for something. I have these new super strong feet. And then I started experimenting with taking my shoes off for a little part of my run in this little running area near our complex at that time in Austin. And I ran so differently. I was so sensitive all throughout my body to my posture and my core. I was running from my core much more intuitively and spontaneously because feet hurt when you touch the ground. And they should if you're running on rocks and gravel and things like that. And so instantly you run with a completely different awareness, and it affected my running pattern really irreversibly. I've never run, I've always used minimalist shoes since then, if I ever wear shoes, and if I run or walk barefoot. You can't have a heel strike. Heel strike is gone the second that you go barefoot. And heel strike should have never been there in the first place. But we created these cushioned, sofas that we put on our feet, and then we get lazy and we crunch along on our heel, which is throwing force backwards into the system, which is what I saw a lot with video analysis.
But and that goes back to your Kenyan runner, right? Like you were running lighter.
Yes,
you weren't pounding. You're like, oh, rocks.
Yeah. He was just touchdown and lift, touchdown and lift. Everything was in that, and his body lean was. He was just controlling gravity with his touchdown and lift of his feet. And the whole thing was a perpetual motion. It was a beautiful thing to watch. And I don't know if you've ever heard of chi running. I'll put it, I have no affiliation with them whatsoever, but they they basically used a Tai Chi approach to analyzing and then teaching proper running form. What's curious, I went through using their techniques and I ended up with Kenyan running form. It's just, you can't make that up. So their system, which was about pure economy of motion and how water falls and how systems get into this perpetual kind of motion, they get into this midfoot, just dropping and picking up your foot. And this whole, everything about it. And here I've got this Kenyan runner on video. I can put those two guys side by side and they are using identical running mechanics. Mm-hmm. So people are like, oh, are you this kind of a runner or that kind of a runner? Do you do the pose method or do you do this method? And I just think, how about just do it right? Come on, people.
Just do it right. Come on, Dave. If that looks like let's just do it right. Come on, guys. Get it right first time.
Run like a human.
Don't run at all. Come on.
But I'm sure, like, you're talking about how, you were relating to running barefoot and your experience with it. And what I got from is that you were running lighter. You didn't want to have the heel strike. You weren't having the, you're like, oh, I'm walking on a surface that can potentially, injure me coming from a shod society. Right.
Right.
And I think that my experience with the insole is that it definitely makes you run lighter because you're having that feedback sooner. So you're not like planting on.
Yes. It's that, I always just shift gears sometimes into how you're stimulating kidney one with every impact of the foot. Kidney bladder meridian travels up hamstrings, glutes. It's just, that's why I was so quick to jump on wanting to test what these things did with EMG. And a runner was one of the first, a young competitive runner was one of the first people I tested. And within 6 weeks, her patterns smoothed out. It's incredible to see the change that she underwent. All she did is I didn't even tell her anything. Just said, use these and let's test you now. Let's test you in 6 weeks and let's see what changes happen. And the symmetry of glute firing, the symmetry of hamstring firing, the early engagement, the firing pattern between hamstring, glute, and paraspinals was much quicker. So there's less delay between hamstring and glute activation. All those things happening. And that was, she's like a 16-year-old junior athlete and, nothing else really in the way except she was quite asymmetrical. She'd been a tennis player for a long time. So I think that probably contributed somewhat, but just to see, that was some of the first data that I sent Lance. I remember saying, this is really interesting. I'm enjoying using them, but I want to see for myself. I want to measure other people and see what happens to them. So that was, and I had a guy with flat feet that was, now he's like, he just sings the praises of barefoot science because he's diabetic with flat feet and all the troubles that he had. And he's buying these insoles for his brother and all these people. It's like, this new thing that he was so excited about. So
there's an interesting, you were saying about, you're into minimal shoes, I'm into minimal shoes, but there's this whole thing that's going around that market where, as a therapist, I've treated so many people who have gone to minimal shoes and then got injured. And they've got injured because their feet aren't strong enough to support them in that midfoot plant. They can't plant heel first, which is what they've been doing in their old trainers.
Right, exactly. Once you subtract heel, right,
so calf and Achilles problems. So this is one of the things with getting that proprioceptive stimulus into the bottom of the foot. It gets them over that hump of getting injured as soon as they go to midfoot strike. It creates the signal to make them, and this is where your measuring of the muscle activation is so striking, isn't it? Because you can say, this isn't just a myth, this is measurable, it's happening. We can see certain muscles firing up more efficiently.
Well, and the system corrects. I work with this gal there's this a thing, I won't say what it's called, but it's like a shorty wetsuit that has muscle stimulators built into it. And then there's this app that you get and it's made in Germany. It's this very sophisticated thing. And it sends voltage to like glutes, to quads, to hamstrings, to pecs, to triceps. And you're supposed to put this thing on and dial it in and turn on this voltage. It's not adjustable left to right. It's strict. It's adjustable from zone to zone, but not adjustable left to right. It's got a big battery and transmitter and receiver and all this stuff. And this lady who's a yoga master was testing it, and she would do her yoga workout. She would get tested on EMG, Then she would do her yoga workout, get tested again on EMG. Then we did EMG testing. She put on the suit and did her yoga workout. And then we did EMG testing again. And so we did basically each of the possible combinations. And her just this is a mind blower it was for me, because I kept thinking, well, I know that her glutes are firing asymmetrically. She's very, very high on the left, very low on the right, a typical right hip flexor dominance pattern. When she goes to do a hip extension, her right glute barely fires, her left glute would fire a lot. And she puts this suit on, and afterwards, her glutes are firing symmetrically. If anything, a little higher on the right and a little lower on the left. So dramatically therapy. If I could have done that as a therapist, I win, right? To get that to happen. But the voltage was symmetrically applied. So it just blew me away, because
Hold on. Sorry, David, I got to back up for someone like me. So is the suit, the suit is, in my mind, is like a 10 suit, like those little 10
Katie wants a suit. It's a 10.
So is it shocking her as she's working out, and that's what's creating shocking in quotations, not actually shocking her, but
it's a TENS suit. Yes.
It's crazy.
I know, but these are the kinds of things people bring me to test. And it was a really fun project, because I sent her all the report and stuff, and darned about if this thing, I was first of all thinking, maybe if I do the testing, the company will be interested in the data. Maybe they'll hire me to do the fine tuning so we can use it as a therapeutic intervention. But I watched what happened with that suit, and I thought, you don't need to tune it. The body takes the voltage where it needs it, and where it doesn't need it, it just doesn't take it.
That's funny, because that makes me think of Reiki,
Right.
It's like a
I don't
Reiki
know how
approach.
that would. Yes.
Well, because Reiki, the idea is that you can do it anywhere, but the energy goes to where the body needs it.
To where takes things like vitamin C. You take so much vitamin C, you can't really take too much, because your body just takes what it needs and discards the rest. So it's like that with voltage, which to me was remarkable. Like, to think that for all the years I've spent developing how to treat in the right sequence with motor points and stimulation, talking the body out of this defensive thing, I'm only dealing with the voltage that's there. But when you come along from outside and apply voltage in, the body does seem to kind of, at least in a whole system-wide application like this, it seemed to use what it needed and not use what it didn't need. So that's the kind of thing that I love getting to do what I get to do, because I learned things that I never would have thought. My brain would have, I never intuitively assumed anything like that. And yet that's what the data shows. So
David,
deal with the data, right? Problem data in EMG. The problem is, now I have a problem.
So David, in principle then, so what you're saying is the body gets the same amount of voltage stimulus wherever, learns how to use it correctly. So in effect, when we go, the way you discover Barefoot science stimulates those proprioceptive nerves, but it's creating electrical chemical impulses, but we always have the same different sides. You've got 7 different stages of plugs that go into the underside of the insole. But you need to keep the same plug in either side. So even though somebody may be completely asymmetric, you give them the same number plug, and the brain, or the signaling, the electrical amplitude, the brain will figure out and then create symmetrical movement.
You're hitting the nail on the head. I actually thought very, very early on with Barefoot science that I was going to manipulate left to right, that I would use a little here and a little more, because I know, right? Because I know. Well, what do I know? Yeah, you were doing the same thing, I'm sure. And forget, don't bother. You just put them in and just follow the directions on the package. You'll be fine. It's like that with cross extension too, because I've had people say, "Oh, should I do 5 more on this side because my left glute is a little weaker, or should I do this?" And it's cross extension. It's doing so many things on so many levels that your brain's going to figure out what to do with it. You can't. If you're doing it right, it's going to do you right. It's not going to, you're not going to harm yourself, because you'll harm yourself if you start trying to figure it out. Just do it. Do what it says on the package.
Just do it. Some other sports branders use that. We can't use that one, can we? Just do it.
No, we can't.
So we're going to finish on that note, Dave, and say,
stop not doing it. Stop. That'll be a stop
not doing it. Yeah. Tick. So we're gonna wrap this one up and just thank you. I've loved this podcast. I mean, we've had lots of fascinating guests on, but because this is my territory, I've loved chatting with you, and it's been fascinating. So we're going to wrap up with this. Katie's going to sign us out, but don't go away, Dave, because we need to talk to you.
Okay. So, grab a snack. We'll be right.
Well, thank you so much, Dave, for coming and joining us on the Born to be Barefoot podcast with my beautiful friend, Stuart, who's up there in the UK, and myself, Katie Tsuzuki, who's down here in New Zealand. And Dave, whereabouts are you again?
In Central Texas.
In Central Texas. And we are all over the place. But yeah, thank God we're a recorded podcast, and all of our subscribers and listeners out there can tune in anytime through whatever podcast outlet you like to use. We're on all of them. But thank you all to our listeners. And as I said before, if you haven't done so yet, make sure you hit the subscribe button and tee up this podcast listen every week. David, how can people get in touch or follow yourself if they would like to know more about Mr. David Lemke?
Well, if they just go to www.davelemke.us, that's probably the quickest way. That'll link to my website, and I've got a toll-free number there, and I think my email is on there. And there are a lot of upcoming projects. There's not a lot on my site. It doesn't say a lot about me, but they could contact me through there. And
perfect.
So my favorite email is bioperformancetx@gmail.com.
There we go.
So bioperformancetx@gmail.com is the best email for me. And I won't give you my phone because I get a lot of weirdos calling.
So anyone out there who would like to talk to Dave, feel free to reach out. And thank you all for listening. Thank you, Stuart, for being amazing.
Fantastic. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
And we will hear you all again soon. You've been listening to the Born to be Barefoot podcast with myself, Kate Tsuzuki, and the wonderful Stuart Gordon. Please remember to hit the subscribe button and give us a 5-star review. We'll see you guys next week.